Good morning, everyone. I'm Tracy McKibben, the Chair of the Finance and Risk Committee of the Authority and the New York State Canal Corporation. I'd like to welcome my committee members, Chairman John Comel, Dennis Trainer, Betheda Gonzalez, Anthony Pacenti, and Michael Balboni. Also want to welcome the NYPA and Canal Corporation staff that's here physically as well as virtually participating in the meeting. This meeting has been duly noticed as required by the Open Meetings Law, and I call this meeting to order. Everyone's had a chance to look at the agenda. Are there any amendments to the agenda? With no amendments, I'll ask for a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
I think I heard a seconded in there. Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. The agenda is adopted. The next portion of the meeting will be held in executive session. I'll ask for a motion to conduct an executive session to discuss the financial and credit history of a particular corporation pursuant to Section 105 of the Public Officers Law.
So moved.
Second.
I think I heard a seconded in there. Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. We will go into executive session. I'll ask for a motion to resume the meeting in open session.
So moved.
Second.
I think I heard a seconded in there. Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. No votes were taken during the executive session. The members were polled prior to the meeting regarding conflicts and have submitted all potential conflicts to the corporate secretary for inclusion in the minutes. I'll invite Adrian Lotto Walker, VP and Chief Risk and Resilience Officer, to present an update on our risk. Adrian, oh, there you are. Okay, over to you, Adrian.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, EMC, trustees, and my NYPA and Canal's colleagues. My name is Adrian Lotto Walker, and I'm here today to present the Risk and Resilience Officer report. Next slide, please. There's going to be three updates that we're going to provide today. First, I'll provide an update to our risk management program maturity. Secondly, I'll provide an update on our emerging risk program and highlight some of the emerging risks that we are tracking today. And then finally, I will turn it over to my colleagues, and in partnership with the EPMO office, Bill Knowles will present on how we manage our capital project portfolio risk throughout NYPA and Canals. So next slide, please. So as the board will recall, last year in 2021, we provided and we did our first Gartner risk assessment. At that time, we presented our scores to all of you. And if you recall, we scored at that time approximately a 2.4, which was slightly below industry benchmark. So we endeavored over the course of the year, the Risk and Resilience team, in partnership with the EMC and our colleagues throughout the authority, to really raise the bar and try to obtain a score of 3. So I am glad and happy to report that in 2022, we once again took the risk assessment and scored ourselves. And we scored, not only did we hit the 3, but we scored slightly above a 3 in 3.2. The green bars show the areas in which we matured. And certainly, you know, I'm very, very proud, and I think the team is very proud of the work that we've accomplished throughout the year. There's a couple of key accomplishments. You're familiar with most of them as we've reported and worked with you. One was obviously passing the first ever risk appetite statement in connection with the board and with working with our EMC. Others notable accomplishments was teaming up with our partners on the controls side, with Dolly Jinbit and her team, to really mature our controls program, and then continuing to mature our EGRC tools. So we spent a considerable amount of time this past year capturing operational risk throughout every single department in the authority. We reached 100% of the business units. Now, there's obviously a handful of areas that still require some attention. Those are indicated on the bottom half of the chart. But that said, we do have a robust program that is in place for 2023, where we're going to seek to mature all of these 4 areas so that, again, when we come back next year, we will not only have exceeded the target of 3 and 3.2, but also hit benchmark on every single area. Next slide, please.
Sorry, Adrian, before you go on, because I just want to make sure that I understand this chart as I look at it. And I assume that the 3.2 is an average of where we fell in all of the categories that you've laid out, right?
That's right.
And I guess help me get comfortable with the fact that there are items where we set a target for 2022, and you've done amazing work at getting us to where we are, putting together a risk and control framework as you have that helps us operate with that sort of thinking throughout the enterprise. But there are at least 6 or 7 areas where we fell well below what was established as a target. And so how do can we have a discussion about how we didn't meet those, we set a target, why we didn't meet those in those areas, and the plan going forward to make sure that we bring all of the categories up to a target that's set, or do we need different targets for different areas?
No, so just to be clear, there's only 4 areas where we didn't meet target, right? So the dark blue on the chart was last year's score. The green, the neon green is where we raised the score to today. And so benchmark is that orange one going across. So it's only 4 areas where we are below. That said, we have a plan for each one. And I think it's important to understand with this chart that it's how the internal risk department is scoring, not how NYPA holistically is scoring. So for example, if you look all the way to the right, you'll see something that says enabling regulatory compliance, right? That's not to say we don't have robust regulatory and compliance programs. We have FERC dam safety, we have EH&S, we have Joe Grislow and the legal team working in ethics. But what we need to work on next year, and what is part of the roadmap that Adam and others will continue to strive to achieve, is folding and maturing how risk management works with those other departments. So it's becoming a more holistic and truly acting as that second line versus using a more desegregated approach throughout the authority. That's where we're striving to really make some leaps and bounds. But I don't want to give the misimpression that we have a poor regulatory or compliance program, anything like that. That's certainly not the case. It's just weaving our team, the risk and resilience team, more holistically into the process. Does that make sense?
Okay, great. All right.
Well,
Just one more.
Go ahead.
What is managed ERM staff? What is the ERM?
That's the end. So ERM, okay, so great question. ERM in industry is usually enterprise risk management. Here at NYPA, we have, my team is called Risk and Resilience, so it's a little bit different, and we use ERM as the acronym for Sarah's team. So it's a bit confusing because, again, this isn't a benchmark that Gartner put out. So this is traditional language, but really it's managing the internal risk and resilience staff. So it's looking at how am I setting their goals and targets? What kind of investment are we making to ensure that they have development opportunities, training opportunities, that type of thing. And then holding, obviously, staff accountable for meeting deliverables.
Thank you.
Who's the champion network?
So that's an interesting one. The champion network is conceptually the idea, and we do it in safety here at NYPA, right? It's this idea that throughout each of the business units, there should be an individual that has a dotted line back to risk management. So that risk management is embedded into each one of those business units. Now, we do have POCs that we work with in every single business unit at NYPA, right? Utility ops, comm ops, HR, IT, and that is how we get reports and have transparency into the business units. But we don't have, I don't have, or the future CRO does not have dotted line authority over those individuals. I think that's certainly something I know Christina and I have talked about with, again, maturing the program and it's something that's going to be considered continuing on the table for 2023. But of course, we always have to balance growing headcount, cost, and the like.
Thank you.
Right.
John, you had a question?
Yeah, same church, different pew, or ask a little bit differently. I just want to, excuse me, ensure we've got a handle on what exposures you feel we have, given the lack of maturity in certain areas. I was going to use regulatory compliance as an example. You've already addressed it. And I don't want to get hung up in definitional debates and all the rest of that, but from a board standpoint, want to ensure that while we've got a good process and the overall maturity level of the organization continues to evolve, I want to better understand what exposures we think we have and what we're doing to mitigate or manage them as you continue to mature the day-to-day or operational practices. So yeah, regulatory ensuring or enabling regulatory compliance, it's a bit of a at least yellow flag, if not a red flag, that suggests we're well below where we've otherwise targeted. So okay, does that mean we have exposure? What is it? How are we managing, et cetera? So I'm just looking not for a response here this morning, but somebody to come back and give us between now and board meeting some better understanding of what those risk gaps are, the real risk gaps are, as our risk management systems continue to mature and how we're otherwise mitigating that.
Sure, we can.
Following?
Sure, we can. I'm happy to work with, as I said, the groups that I just mentioned to put together a memo and send it up to all of you to understand there. I would almost say the risk in that area is particularly minimal. We've been, the authority has had a very, very strong compliance program for a number of years now across all the different areas, but I'm happy to put that together in a memo prior to leaving next week and Chairman, get that up to you and the remainder of the board.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. If there's no further questions on this slide, next slide, please. So again, last year, if you'll recall, one of the areas we didn't score particularly high on that we wanted to formalize and really move forward was our emerging risk program. We had an emerging risk program, but unfortunately, it was a bit ad hoc. So we endeavored over the course of the last year, and I'm happy to report, we now have a operational emerging risk program. Director Tom Sabin on my staff works very closely to monitor all of these risks. You'll see some of the work he's accomplished over on the left-hand side of the screen. But if you go to the next slide, these are some of the risks that we are currently tracking from an emerging risk perspective. Now, this slide was obviously had to be submitted and was put together last month, so it's certainly not inclusive by way of example. I'm sure we were all watching the news yesterday and had been monitoring over the course of the last week, even this morning. I think the Times reported that Amtrak had reached a deal with the railroads and the railroad unions. But we had already been monitoring that event to start to understand, and John Canal and the SSM team working with my team reached out to suppliers to understand, should a strike have occurred, what, if any, impact would there have been to NYPA? Now, luckily, we heard back from our suppliers, and it's our understanding there would have been virtually a very minimal impact. Again, glad to see that they've seemed to have reached a tentative agreement early this morning, or at least that's what's being reported on. But these are, some of the emerging risks that we're tracking are on the screen here today. We've talked to you about all of them, right, including inflation, the downturn, Chinese trade tensions, what it means from not only a supply chain perspective, with solar inverters, how it impacts our programs, but also from the cyber side. We've talked about the conflict in Europe with Ukraine, and then certainly partnering with HR. We've talked considerably with all of you about what remote work, how that's changed, and some of the cultural impacts it has had, not only at the authority but across various industries. We also, as you know, we expanded our risk assessments program last year, and I know Trustee McGibbon, we're actively working, as I promised you last time, to expand our risk assessment for canals. But these are, again, we're trying to take some of those emerging risks and then feeding that information into our annual risk assessment to make sure that we have a holistic approach end to end on how we're monitoring these. And so nothing falls through the cracks, and we understand impacts to the authority. With that said, I wanted to turn it over to Bill Knowles. We talked last time, if you'll recall, about inflationary pressures and what that would mean, and the question arose on how it would potentially impact our capital project plans. And so with that, I wanted to turn it over to Bill. He'll discuss risk management of our capital portfolio, and then we can answer any questions you may have. Bill?
So before we go to the portfolio discussion, I did have one question on the list that you have of emerging risk, and it may not be comprehensive, and I don't know how you think about it in the canal, which is why I can keep raising the canal question and making sure we're incorporating that into our thinking as we evaluate the risk for the entire organization. Is how do you think about, I guess I'll call it climate change or environmental or weather events, right? All you have to do is look out west of what's happening to the rivers that are drying out, flooding, we're a hydro, utility. Where does that fall? And again, I look at emerging or things that can shock the system. You don't really know what they are. How does that fit in? Is that in another category of risk? Is that not considered an emerging risk?
So we don't, it's a great question. We don't actually consider that an emerging risk because it is something, as you just indicated, that's documented, well known, and unfortunately, the impacts keep continuing to be felt, whether, out west or a couple years ago, whether it's hurricanes and the like. So it doesn't fall into this emerging risk category. It's captured as one of our enterprise risks. We do have, and I know I've spoken to the board before, we do have a climate risk assessment that we partnered with one of the DOE national labs, Argonne National Lab, that we just yesterday got a first draft of. So I know the teams, my team and sustainability team under Yves Noel are actively reviewing that document. And I know they are very much looking forward to coming back and briefing all of you on what the results of that is. It's been over a year-long endeavor. So they are vetting the results. We'll be working with all of and then when the time is appropriate, they'll be coming to brief you on all of that information. And then that will also get captured in the annual risk assessment as well.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, can I weigh in here one more on that? Excuse me, Tracy. So, yeah, I'm looking back. One, I think, this is a great job of recapping the risk. So I'm looking at slide 11, or at least what's slide 11, I think, in the appendix. And you created some context in the primary department, who's overseeing. But I guess I would ask that we think about how we have a more comprehensive running dialogue on not just what the risks are, but the ramifications and how we better quantify that or qualitatively triage, what needs to be done and what we're doing differently organizationally. So I think it's great we identify and talk about the emerging risks, but that has impact on everything from operations to strategy, et cetera. So I would ask that we take that information on slides 10 and 11 and make that a running agenda item for us, but that we extend it to the solution side as opposed to just the problem, or that we better, define and talk about the solutions, ramifications, actions, reactions. Not just, it's like, it seems to me to be half a loaf.
Would impact.
Let's ensure we have a more complete dialogue.
Will do. I'm happy to provide that. We'll go back and I'll talk to the team to ensure that going forward, we capture that as a column as well, Chairman, no problem.
Good idea.
All right, thanks.
Okay, portfolio management.
Thank you, Adrian, and good morning, trustees, committee members, and staff. My name is Bill Knowles, and I'm a senior director in NYPA's Enterprise Portfolio Management Office, or EPMO. I've been invited to speak to you today on 3 items. First, I'll provide a brief overview of the EPMO group and our function. Second, I'll provide a brief introduction to our new enterprise-wide project governance and stage gate framework. And finally, I'll provide an overview of our investment and project risk escalation paths. Now to begin, the EPMO group was first established in 2020, principally in response to our major increases in capital investments across our transmission and infrastructure portfolios. The key objectives of the team were to drive consistency and standardization across the organization and how projects are initiated, planned, as well as to streamline processes to better react to rapidly changing industry and environmental factors, to prioritize and align work to our business objectives, and to improve overall visibility into project performance. 2 groups were immediately established to address these objectives. The Enterprise Governance and Portfolio Management Group, which I lead, has been focused on establishing standardized project and program management processes, as well as creating enterprise portfolio management, and then implementing and enabling technologies to deliver a scalable, best-in-class portfolio program and project management capabilities. All of these efforts have been coupled into a program that we call Project Hub. The second group, Asset Investment Management, has been focused on establishing a consistent value-based decision-making framework for the organization, which includes standardized business cases, facility pro formas, and the management of the investment committee. More recently, a third group has been established called Business Optimization, the objective of which is to create and enhance business value across the organization. And an initial focus of the group was a deep analysis of certain operating costs, and several recommendations have been made to reduce such expenses. The entire EPMO group resides within the Business Services BU under the leadership of our CFO, Adam Barsky. Our position in the organization is really crucial as we need to maintain objectivity and a holistic view of the entire organization. However, the team does interface and collaborate daily with all of the different business units and project delivery and control groups throughout the organization. Next slide, please.
Quick question I have.
Yes.
When you look at sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
When the projects, is every project, I like the fact that you're standardizing your process. I think that'll be very helpful in how you communicate them and the work that we're doing to the board. Does every project go into this consideration, or is there a size that you focus on more? I saw you use the term major. Is there a size that goes into this program, or is it every project feeds into you?
Yeah, great question. So there is a lower threshold in terms of dollar investment. I believe now we've established a threshold at $200,000, and typically it focuses on capital projects and non-recurring O&M. However, the governance framework itself, and I'll touch upon this a little on the next slide, it's actually scalable. So not every project, depending on the cost and complexity, there's varying levels of rigor in the framework. So your more complex, more costly projects will introduce much more project management activities and rigor, deliverables, whereas your smaller projects will have a much lighter set of project management principles applied to them. So we find that there's a nice balance between the two. But then everything is aggregated in one common system. So we do have transparency across all of our different investments and project efforts. Hopefully that answers your question. Yep. Foundationally, all of the standardized portfolio, program, and project management processes and decision-making frameworks live within our broader project and portfolio governance and stage gate framework, which is depicted on this slide. Now, it's important to note that historically, governance does and has existed at NYPA. However, it's been in a very decentralized fashion. So we've worked collaboratively with all of our different business partners and project execution groups to establish one central enterprise-wide framework that all projects flow through. Of course, there are many benefits to this: efficiency, the ability to share practices across different business units, simplification, improved transparency, and really ultimately building a sense that we're one team working towards a common set of goals. Not to go into too many details here, but a few key takeaways in regards to the framework. So I guess to the point raised previously, projects and programs progress through a series of stages with an increasing level of development and funding. It all starts with ideas, opportunities, problem statements, or risks, and it ends in the successful delivery of a product, service, or result. At the end of each stage is a gate, which is a common checkpoint, again, across the organization that allows us to verify and ensure that results have been achieved and that we continue to align with organizational goals and objectives. These are logical points where funding and resources can be recommitted and recommitted to the project. This governance model itself is scalable. Again, the project management rigor and activities and processes will scale based on the total cost of the project, as well as an assessment of the risk and complexity of its execution. I'd like to draw your attention to one particular stage, which is the post-project stage. So this is after a project has been turned over and delivered by the project execution group. Really, this stage is essential as it allows us to validate that the project achieved the expected benefits that were first laid out in the business case. Those benefits could be financial or non-financial, and it's critical that we're ensuring and there's a constant feedback loop so that our business casing is accurate, and again, that we're ultimately achieving our objectives. The EPMO group is responsible for governing this process overall, and we ensure that our projects are consistently aligned with strategy, with our asset management plans, with financial capacity, with our risk framework, and also taking a look at overall organizational capacity. People, do we have enough people? It's important to recognize that typically projects come to the FRC or the Board of Trustees for approval above the 10 million investment level in stage 2. That's part of the business casing process. This is where the project has been developed and defined to the point where we understand the scope and the rationale for undertaking the project, but it's also critical because we have not yet committed any major funds or resources to the project. Then when projects are approved through stage 2, the costs and schedules are baselined and the project performance will be tracked and measured against these baselines. And any variances against those baselines are analyzed and assessed and would potentially require reapproval of the appropriate governance body as the fundamentals of the business case may have been changed or altered. Next slide, please.
So one question I have, and I don't know if it's a question or statement, this is fabulous work in terms of how you are putting discipline into how you look at your projects. Very good. So you said it comes to us, we get the Board of Trustees gets the first look through this committee at stage 2. And so I saw this as a process to help you do better, and Adam, you can correct me if I'm wrong, in financial forecasting. You know, what are the costs of projects? But because you come to us before there's planning and design, I don't know if my belief or thought is accurate. Does this, will this help you then do better in terms of being able to evaluate what the costs of projects are? And do we get another look after you do the planning and design? Because there could be increased cost that come out of that stage in terms of when it's brought to us, when we approve it and know what it's really going to cost us to pursue or execute on a project that we approve. Do you understand the question that I'm asking?
I do. I think it's important to note that stage 3 really is the detailed engineering stage. Typically, in your stage 1, you're really looking at the impact to the business, feasibility. You could potentially bring in engineering firms or engage the engineering resources within the organization to really develop conceptual designs. This is further refined in stage 2. This is where we start looking at alternates. What happens if we don't do the project? What are different options in terms of execution? And we do develop estimates and resource plans for each one of those options. And ultimately, a single recommendation is typically made up as part of the business case. So I would suggest that there is good rigor, typically a pretty decent estimate at that point. But of course, you know, as you move into execution, things change. And so, we obviously, we recognize that. And so I think that's why it's critical that variances, right, outside those approved baselines then would require reapproval and re-review by the governance body that ultimately approved the business case. And hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, and I would just add, Bill,
Adam,
it also
unmute.
depends.
Unmute. Oh, sorry.
It also depends on what project we're working with. If it's a project we know we have to do, we're going to put a lot more, if like a state of good repair or a mandated project, we're going to put a lot more rigor up front into what we actually think it's going to cost. Some of these other projects where we're competing, we're getting to maybe a lower level of design when we're putting into the bid because of the costs involved, but we'll build in the necessary contingency at that level. And then as you get more into design, you can start readjusting your contingency down accordingly. So all of that sort of informs the process, but it really depends on what bucket the projects fall in.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. Yeah, and I think that's the point of that scalable model. Again, those larger projects, higher cost, higher complexity. The artifacts that are developed in stage 1 and 2 are much more rigorous. There could be, quantitative, qualitative risk assessments done. There could be, deep engineering studies done, various workshops. And so that, I think that's, again, we're matching the right level of project management discipline to the overall cost of the project. Okay, final topic. I guess the reason I'm here today is to talk about the investment and project risk escalation paths. So first of all, it's important that you understand how investments and project risks are escalated and decisions are made within the organization, and why certain items are coming to the board for approval at certain times. So within individual business units and execution groups, risks and opportunities are first identified. Low risks and low investments are generally handled at each business unit by its leadership. These items are, again, managed at the operating level and typically don't raise up to the level of board involvement. However, they are part of the annual budgeting process. And then, of course, we do have the ability to aggregate all of this information to see if potentially projects may not have significant risk, but we can, again, aggregating that data, we can see how risk potentially, there's interdependencies between different projects and programs. So we do have visibility on that. Medium risks for individual projects, assets, or investments, typically requiring 10 million or up in funding, would be escalated and handled at the enterprise level. This is typically done through the EPMO group and would be represented by your typical trustee consent items. Finally, significant project risks and investments requiring at least $25 million in funding, or projects realizing significant variances of 10 million or more. These would go to our investment committee for review. The investment committee meets monthly, and it leverages a cross-functional review team that conducts appropriate due diligence and ultimately makes recommendations up to the investment committee. These investments that pass through the investment committee do end up in front of the board as individual items. These major investments, once reviewed by the board, then would reside in what we call our major project and program dashboards. This is now provided in your board materials. Here's where we report on overall project and program performance, any major changes, and any significant material updates to the project. Any risks, organizational or beyond the scope of projects, would typically be handled by Adrian and the enterprise risk team, and would rise up through the enterprise risk and resilience management committee. And then they would be brought to the board for its discussion and review. That concludes my presentation, and I'm going to pass it back to Adrian for any closing remarks.
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks. Any other questions for Bill? Okay, go ahead, Adrian.
Wanted to take a moment, Trustee McKibben, if it's okay, to just say a heartfelt and sincere thank you to all of you. So first, I just want to say a big thank you to Justin, Adam, the EMC, Joe, and others for believing in me, working with me over the course of the last 2 years. And then also a big thank you to the Board of Trustees, particularly you, Trustee McKibben and Chairman Comel, I'm honestly a better executive leaving NYPA than I was a couple of years ago when I walked through the door. So it's been challenging at times, but certainly rewarding. I also thanked my team yesterday, but I think I would be remiss if I didn't do it again, because they've worked very, very hard for me over the course of the last several years. They've made really, really big strides and moved the office and the authority forward. And without them, obviously, I couldn't do it. So I just really appreciate them. And then finally, my NYPA and Canal's colleagues. I've learned a ton from all of you. It's been an honor to be down in the trenches, the proverbial trenches with all of you. So please keep in touch. I'm on LinkedIn. A lot of you guys have my phone number, but just a big thank you. It really has been a journey, and I'm truly appreciative of the time.
Well, Adrian, I want to thank you on behalf of the committee and the entire board. What the impact that you've had on this part, the risk part of the business, I think can't be understated. Your work is greatly appreciated. You will be missed. As I said in our pre-brief call, I might not let you go, actually, but I'm sure your husband has other views on that. But yes, again, thank you from all of us. We appreciate the work that you've done. You've left us in a better place and a much stronger place in terms of how we look at risk and controls throughout the entire enterprise. So thank you.
And congratulations. Best of luck.
And I appreciate that.
Great. Adam, over to you.
Okay, good morning, trustees, my colleagues, members of the public. Just giving an update on the actuals through end of July. We'll have further updates, the board meeting on our 8+4. So through July, we were at 88 million net income versus our target of 40 million. And all the themes we've been speaking about continue to carry. Energy prices doing better than budget. Some of that being put into those monetized funds. So it goes back to economic development programs for around the state. So some of that's being reinvested through that. And expenses, remain pretty steady. As we watch, inflation and interest rates and all the other, supply chain issues and events. So we monitor those very closely, but everything seems to be, going well and above target. Next slide. End of the year forecast. Again, this is a range. I would say we're probably more at the higher end of the range at this point, given where we think we were through August and what we're seeing through the end of the year. Even if we revert back to our budget numbers, we do see softening in some of the prices in some of the areas. We've seen some of that come down. Its gas prices have eased up a little bit, but given our hedging program and other things, we're pretty certain about where we're going to see ourselves at the end of the year, given the visibility we have now. So we intend to continue this trend, and probably we'll end up somewhere at the higher end of this range. One of the things I was speaking about last time was the pension expense. We've gotten numbers in from the state. Those appear to be in line with budget. We were concerned because they changed some of their assumptions, bringing down their expected investment rate of return, and recent legislation that shortened the vesting period. Those would have impacts on the liabilities. Those, I think, and plus the market performance, which thankfully for this year, is measured through March 31st. That's the state's fiscal year. They managed to do okay, given, but most of the damage in the stock market, as you know, after March 31st. So we'll have to be watching closely between now and next March where we end up. But for our planning purposes, we're going to plan to expect that there's going to be a much higher expense next year for pensions. But other than that, everything else continues to be on track and going well. Any other questions about the forecast?
No, you've managed to navigate pretty well.
Thank you.
Originally, we had talked earlier in the year about supply chain impacts. Have those basically dissipated at this point?
Well, I mean, I think, even given what's happening today, with the rail strike, I would say no, because there is so much volatility out there. We have to be vigilant about watching it. Every now and then, there's another outbreak of a COVID variant and there's a lockdown in China. We're not out of the woods on any of this stuff yet. But given, again, all of the other things that can happen, and you see that, and also just the competition for labor, competition for work, the amount of money being spent on infrastructure, especially here in New York State, is going to have people competing for contractors' jobs, capacity availability. So this is an area of emergent risk, as we spoke before, that we're going to have to keep really working on and watching and monitoring and having all kinds of alternative mitigating actions we can take to deal with the risks that we see out there right now. So this is something that's really high on our agenda.
Thank you.
Prices are coming down a little bit, right? We saw, as we talked about some of our other projects where we saw steel prices go up and other commodity prices go up. Those have eased somewhat. But again, the logistics and supply chain remains in place as a high risk.
Would you say the pressure on supply chain is less about the financial impact as opposed to like timelines, being able to get the raw materials that you need? Is that where you're more likely to continue to see
Absolutely.
pressure?
Absolutely. And
Just timing.
just back to our world, like with renewables and things like that, was at we had some conferences over the last week with project finance people and others. It used to be, financing of tax equity or financing for like a solar project. They wanted to see PPAs in place and the tax equity in place. That has moved to saying they want to see the panels available before they finance. They don't want to finance without knowing that you have the panels. So, the focus has really shifted to exactly your point, Trustee McKibben.
Great.
Other questions?
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you.
No votes was necessary, both in terms of the Chief Risk and Resilience Officer report, as well as the Chief Financial Officer report. Any other questions for Adam? All right. Adam, the court
Yes.
release of funds. You were going to talk about that for the canal.
Correct. I'll just do that from here. So we have our fourth quarter release for the canal funds. Again, it's the quarterly budget release, the same amount as last quarter, same amount tracking to overall budget. Nothing has changed there. If there's any questions on that?
Any questions? If there are no questions, I'll entertain a motion to recommend this item to the full board for adoption.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? The motion carries. This will be sent to the full board. I'll now invite Andy Boulay, VP Project and Construction Management, to present the next item on our agenda.
Good morning, everybody. I'm here to present just one item on the agenda on behalf of operations. Today, this item is for the Transmission Life Extension and Modernization Program at the Niagara Switchyard. It is a contract award. Today, we're requesting the recommendation of the approval of a 5-year construction service contract in the approximate amount of $33 million to Ferguson Electric Construction Company of Buffalo, New York, to the Board of Trustees at their September meeting. As you may recall, the TLM program was approved by the trustees at their December 2012 meeting for an approximate amount of $726 million. The Niagara Switchyard LEM project is a $276 million project within that overall program across the state. The scope of work of this contract includes, but is not limited to, the replacement or upgrades of circuit breakers, disconnect switches, and auto transformers, much like we have done in the past at that yard. The request for proposal was issued in March, with one proposal being received in June of this year. We did extend the bidding period by 6 weeks and conducted an additional site walk down on the request of the suppliers. After receiving only one bid, we did do an outreach to those suppliers that were active during the solicitation period to understand why we only received one bid or why they did not bid the event. And there were multiple bidders that expressed concerns regarding staffing resources available to meet commitments. With this, the evaluation committee does make the recommendation based on evaluation criteria on the slide that we make an award to Ferguson Electric for the approximate amount of $33 million for a 5-year term.
So just a general question, and I don't know if you have the answer. Are you seeing more of this where we're having participants who usually participated in our bidding process find, labor challenges preventing them from being able to participate, so it narrows the pool that we can choose from? Does that put pressure on what we have to pay for the work that we do?
Good question. I think for whatever reason, we have seen traditionally only a few bidders in the Western New York region. I'm not 100% sure what the dynamic is there. But I think if you look holistically, you got a certain set of pool of vendors across the state that to traditionally operate within the state. And they're also going to the same union labor halls to get their labor. So it does have an impact overall. It is a risk, but we recognize that risk and we work to mitigate those risks.
Any other questions for Andy?
And can you just give us directional feedback, Andy? You say that in August, Ferguson submitted its updated price. Was that at a benefit to us or an incremental cost to us?
I couldn't quite hear the question, Trustee Kamel.
The update on the price in August,
you said
apparently they came back.
Yes.
Yeah,
So
reviewing, and
Post-
then Ferguson updated their pricing. Was that to our benefit?
understood.
Or detriment?
Yes, actually it is, because we were able to, they were better to understanding of the scope for the project. There were still some misconceptions or clarity needed on the scope of the project. So locking them in at a fixed lump sum price on this scope was to our benefit. So we did not necessarily see change orders in the future.
And follow up on
Thanks.
Tracy's
Any other
point,
questions?
Is there any way we can benchmark this 33 million to, give us some level of comfort when there's a sole bidder, we're just held captive, but we should feel okay about it because it benchmarks reasonably well against some other relevant project? Can you give us any perspective there as to how you guys look at it? Since they're one of one.
I think we're seeing this come in line with some of our more recent bid events. We did do a cost estimate. I think it was slightly higher than our cost estimate, but we were doing a cost estimate based on a 30% design. And that's where some of the initial information went out, as the RFP was a 30% design. Therefore, some of the questions, concerns, and then of course the negotiation that took place along the way.
Yeah, and I would add, you've seen contracts like this before at Niagara or the other switch sides. So we see that this is in line with more of a reasonable escalation, I would say, in terms of labor and small part equipment, conduit, et cetera. This is in line with what we've seen in the past. And to what Andy said, we do fair cost estimates, right, very regularly with our bids. So it is in line. This came slightly higher, but not out of the normal tolerance.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Moved, can I get a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. This will be sent to the full board for adoption. Thank you. Now call on John Markowitz, who will talk to us about e-mobility technology.
Good morning, trustees. Thank you. And we're coming before you today for approval on a set of contracts resulting from a recent RFP we've concluded. If we can go to the next slide, please. So just as way of background, the EV sector is changing very rapidly and growing very rapidly. There are a number of policy drivers, both at the federal and state level, and new streams of funding coming towards us and our government customers like transit agencies, school districts that are incentivizing new projects. And you can see from the forecast here, this affects both the light duty passenger vehicle sector, large number growth in vehicles, and as well as the heavy duty sector. So trucks and buses where we operate with our government customers. So what we really want to be able to do with this new RFP and this set of awards is to broaden our vendor pool, bring in more specialty firms that specialize in some of these sectors, such as transit bus electrification, bring in new vendors, additional installers, more hardware manufacturers and software manufacturers. So this is basically an extension to some contract awards that the board approved back in 2019. We had $150 million in contract capacity. We've been using that up. More than half of that's committed to projects at this point. And those contracts will expire next year. So we're looking to have 5 years of expanded capacity to implement new projects going forward. Next slide, please.
So before we go
Oh,
into the
sure.
next slide, one question that I had as I looked at this and I saw, so we've spent 150 million is what we've previously approved. Is there somewhere where you can capture what that has delivered for us? And then, so you're coming with a new request and where that's supposed to take us. I see where you've got the broad generic of what's happening in the, whether it's the trucks or the e-trucks and e-buses, but I don't know that that's not specifically for NYPA. That's broadly the market, right?
Yes.
Can you help me understand what's been delivered with the 150 million and how this new approval will help us continue to accelerate and drive forward the work that we've already begun?
Yeah, excellent question. So out of the 150 million, we've allocated 86 million so far to active projects. 40 million of that has gone towards our Evolve network. So that's the NYPA-owned network of DC fast chargers that enables EV adoption on the light duty side for passenger vehicles, general public. The other roughly half of the money we've spent down from the previous set of awards is all customer projects where we recoup all those costs from the customers. Those are almost all transit bus projects. There's also some public charging we've built for government customers such as New York City DOT. But the majority of it, I would say, are transit bus projects we've done for the 6 largest transit agencies. So basically DC fast chargers and bus depots.
Yeah, I guess going forward, it would be helpful for us to be able to see, because I'd like to know what we've done. Like how many of these have we built? How many what we've supported so that we can track, the money we're spending and what it's actually delivering to the state. So if you could bring that back to us so we can see, and certainly with this new approval of where that's going to take us going forward.
Yeah, thank you. And next slide, please. So what we're asking is approval. So the original contract previously awarded, we had a capacity of $150 million in aggregate across a pool of 20 vendors. For this award, we want to expand that to a pool of 29 vendors. The contracts, like I said, in the prior pool of awards would expire next year. This new pool will take us all the way out to 2027 for its expiration. So it gives us a longer runway. And individual projects within the pool, those will be competitively mini bid. So if we have a specific project at the transit bus depot, we would mini bid it amongst this pool. But what this contract capacity and having this number of vendors under retainer allows us is a lot of flexibility to move quickly. We could do basically these mini competitive bids, move quickly, and then bring vendors in and start installation right away to meet the bus deadlines, since we need to get the chargers installed before the vehicles arrive on behalf of our customers.
So if I recall, the problem we've had in executing on the charger hasn't really been about funding. The money's been there. And we approved 150 million, but you haven't even yet spent all of that. And you're now coming asking for an additional 250 million. And I guess I want to, is there a reason why we haven't been able to spend? Go ahead.
I think the numbers you're tossing around, Tracy, I'm not following. We're not asking for 250 on top of what we previously approved. The 250 includes what we previously approved, right? And we've only spent 82 of the 150 we previously approved. I mean, I'm just making sure the numbers don't get lost here. Okay. So 250 is the total,
exactly,
including the 150 we previously approved. Only half of which we've spent, round numbers.
Correct.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Okay, so then if you could answer my question, like,
yes, and it's basically just to give us the capacity for the new bus installations that we're seeing coming. Basically, then give us a longer runway going out to 2027. So this is all based on discussions we're having with the transit agencies that are under mandates to get to a certain percentage of their fleet to be electric by 2025. And now there's similar mandates coming down on the school bus side. So we're just projecting out projects we expect to be signing next year and going forward out to 2027.
And we believe we'll be able to deliver on this? Because again, there's been some delay in our ability to deliver on our the work that we've done in Evolve, for example. And so we feel like we're caught up and that we'll be able to.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of the delays on the Evolve side were more the real estate acquisition of the individual sites.
Okay.
And this is more focused towards the customer end, although we will use the same contract pool for the Evolve work. But it hasn't been a labor or a parts shortage that's been driving the schedule on Evolve. It's really more just having the appropriate sites and getting them in the ground.
Any other questions?
Well, give me some context as to, so if we're able to, when we're able to deliver on this, what percentage of the aggregate statewide solution are we providing?
And I guess the answer to that would vary by sector. So on the transit bus sector, we're working with all the largest transit bus agencies. Excuse me. So I would say the majority of the transit bus sector. School bus sector, we can only serve about half that market because we can only work with the school district. Sorry about that. Thank you. We can only work with the school districts that own their own buses, and about half that market is served by private contractors. So statutorily, we couldn't work with them. So I'd say our market share is less than half on the school bus sector. Then with public charging that we build for like at a municipal parking lot or so, we're doing the largest entities that are working on that. So the major cities that are installing that kind of work. So there, I would say we have maybe 2/3 of the market.
And John, you've previously stated we're the second largest fast charger next to Tesla currently in the state, correct?
Correct. On the Evolve network, yes.
And I think this is consistent with the point I was trying to make. If you bring back to us so we can actually see what it is, put some numbers. And I think it's related to the question that the chair just asked.
And the flip side of my typical, we don't need to be doing more. I mean, that's all I'm trying to understand is, what's the projected demand and what's our ability to lean into that? Going back to expectations of us as an authority, or if not us, then who give us some perspective on how the overall need will be addressed, so whether it be other school buses, other public transportation, private vehicles. How confident are we that the needed solution, statewide solution, will be achieved? So how did we cap this at 250 and 400 fast charging stations, et cetera, as opposed to make it 450 and 600 fast charging stations? I'm just trying to understand how we got to where we are versus what the overall statewide need is.
Sure, excellent question. So basically on the Evolve network, where we own and operate that, we're closely monitoring what the private sector is doing. And for one example, like for Thruway, we were ready to move forward on Thruway and build out our own chargers at all those travel plazas. But when there was private sector interest in that, we were able to pull back and deploy our capital elsewhere where there were gaps for DC fast charging. So we're watching the private sector very closely and making sure that there's enough DC fast charging to enable EV adoption, but putting our money in last, basically, so that, you know, we're putting in the seed money to enable the market to move forward, but not building where the private sector already is willing to put money in, so we could conserve our money for other purposes. On the transit bus side, we work really closely with all the transit agencies. We've just assisted them in writing master plans to get to 100% electrification by 2035. So in those kind of sectors where we're serving our government customers, we're key partners, looking at their whole implementation plans, long-term capital, staffing, all of that, and being a key partner along with the other utilities in electrifying those bus depots. And the emerging market that's just starting is the school bus side of that, where it's a much larger, more diverse market. There's about 300 school districts we can serve, and about 24,000 school buses. So it's a very large, dispersed market, and we're just starting to staff up to engage and start planning for that and building out the charging infrastructure for all those. And we're also active on the regulatory side, making sure that the utility policies are in place to help do all those grid upgrades.
Well, and given the execution challenges that you've referenced with Tracy earlier, are you confident that we will be able to execute? Obviously, the controller's office took exception to how well we're executing. I want to ensure we've cleared the decks and/or are confident in our ability to fully lean in to this.
Yeah, it's a great question. And yes, we've staffed up appropriately to move these projects forward. One of the things we built into these contract awards was site acquisition services. So we have specialists within that pool of vendors that can help us acquire the new sites on the Evolve side. And
So
our ability to deploy on. Excuse me, I didn't hear that.
Lessons learned.
Oh,
I
lessons
just said
learned,
lessons
exactly.
learned. Great. Okay.
Yep, exactly. So we have a countermeasure for that part of it. And then on the customer side of thing, we don't have that real estate acquisition hurdle. It's really more just bringing in the right qualified vendors, doing the procurements on their behalf and supervising the construction. So it's sort of a different animal on the customer side of things.
John, you might want to comment on the permitting, right? Because acquisition of the site is a host site agreement. Where we've seen challenges is really around the permitting process and the interface with the utility.
Yeah, exactly. So on the Evolve side, two key hurdles early on was utility interconnection and also permitting by the local municipality to get the construction permit to even start the project. We've been very successful working with most of the local municipalities on getting permits done fairly quickly and getting approval to start construction. We've had a handful of municipalities where we hit major hurdles with zoning and things like that, because it's just a new sector and it's not something that's familiar to them. So we've had a few months delay in a handful of sites, but the majority of the sites move through expeditiously. On the utility side is the bigger success. So early on a regulatory side, we lobbied that every utility should have an EV specialist as a single point of contact, not just for NYPA, but any developer of EV charging, because it's really different. You might be requesting the same amount of power as, like, say, a small office building to build a DC fast charger, but the small office building might take 2 years to build and the DC fast charger like less than 6 months. So we really advocated that specialists be in each utility to help us get through the paperwork process in a quicker way, get the transformers installed on the ground, and then light these up more quickly. So that's been a big success, where from the early sites we did to current sites we're doing, the utility interconnection process is shrunken by more than 50%.
Great. Trustee, did we lose everyone?
I can hear you.
I think Trustee Pacenti, I think you had a question. Were you trying to ask a question?
Yeah, I was, and thank you, Chair. I was just, and you answered some of it, but I'm still curious, in terms of talking about the EV charging stations, and as you're going across, looking at Thruway and looking at private developers, I know we're doing, specifically in my county, some new projects with EV chargers, but I guess. Yeah, I've been trying to, make that connection. Are you connecting the local governments that are doing new projects that are including, charging stations, and how NYPA, I think, we can back up to some of what we said earlier about NYPA's role in all this and where they fit. But, it would be helpful, especially on new projects that, we're all looking at, parking garages, new facilities, new entities that are being built, in our communities with now moving charging stations in. How can NYPA be a part of that? And is that something that somebody is doing also an inventory aside from the private sector?
Yeah, it's a great question. We're looking at that closely along with NYSERDA, and trying to focus closely on things like the ratio of apartment dwellers to single home dwellers, because in a particular area, that'll affect how much public charging you're going to require, both the lower speed kind of charging you'd put at a commuter lot, new parking structure, and also DC fast charging. You need a lot more of it for areas like New York City or more urban areas. We have a high number of apartment dwellers to get to the EV adoption numbers that the municipalities need. And yeah, we're working closely with several municipalities, including New York City, on planning all that out. And they have regulations basically to have about 20% of all their new parking spaces be electrified. And we're working with them closely on their commuter lots on doing all that.
And if I understand the question, I think there's an encouragement to work on municipalities outside of New York
Yes.
City.
Yeah, exactly.
One other
And
piece
we've installed these at the other cities upstate as well.
And one other piece I would ask, in terms of the canal, canal side of things, because, on the harbors that are active, in terms of, the locks and such that, see a lot of traffic, more, charging stations for electric boats, need to be, invested in upon that too. So.
Yeah, that's a whole new challenge, that we need to take on. Exactly.
Any other questions? Thank you, John. I'll, after that presentation, I'll ask for a motion to recommend this item to the full board for adoption.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any
you.
opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. All right, the consent agenda is before the committee for adoption. You've had a chance to review it. If there are no questions, I'll ask for a motion to adopt the consent agenda.
So moved.
So moved.
I think I heard a seconded in there. Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. The date of the next Joint Finance and Risk Committee meeting is scheduled to be held on November 15th. I'll ask for a motion to close this committee meeting.
So moved.
So moved.
I think I heard it seconded in there. Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy.
Have a good day.
Well,
Good luck,
thank
Dennis.
you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.